If you don't know, guys, all you Americans out there, multifamily does not exist on the scale it does here in the US, right? You cannot go in Australia and buy 250 garden style apartment units. It just does not exist. You can't go to Canada and do that. You can't go to Europe and do that. It is a very unique asset class specific to the US. So consider yourself, guys, lucky that you have this in the backyard. And that to me was what drew me to that. I'm like, wow, you can buy 200 units and the bank's going to lend on this future value. Like, that's awesome. Yeah.
Tim is one of the most authentic and genuine people I've ever met.
Sincerely believe he's coming from a position of giving, and that means a lot.
You're going to make huge progress.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Capital Raising Show. I'm your host, Tim Mai, and today I have an amazing guest on the line with us, Mr. Reed Goossens. I get a ton of reads. I must be on your retargeting because I get lots of your ads, and I love I love your marketing. Reed came here to the U.S. from Australia in 2012, moved all the way here to chase a dream, and with limited funds, no real estate investing experience, no credits, Reed went from purchasing a small duplex to now growing his own real estate investing firm, RSN Property Group. Reed syndicates large multi-million-dollar deals across the U.S. and has achieved financial freedom and taken control of his life. He is a podcast host and a best-selling author under Investing in the U.S. Some of the bullets that I was able to get from Reed here, very impressive, guys. Since 2014, Reed has acquired 22 assets, around 3,800 units, currently has $685 million asset under management, and have raised over $50 million in capital. So let's give Reed a big welcome, y'all. Woohoo! Awesome. All right, Reed. Share with us what made you decide to get into real estate investing. I'd love to hear that.
Oh, geez. I think the real caveat was I was back in Australia after gallivanting around the world for a couple of years backpacking, and for all those young entrepreneurs out there who are sort of sub 25 years of age, I get asked all the time, what do you recommend? I was like, go backpacking for a period of time, experience the world, learn how to stretch a dollar, and then life will still be here when you get back. But so I did that, and then go back to Australia, and I was like sitting in my engineering job and just thinking, gosh, I just felt like like I was a basketball player sitting on the bench and just watching the game go before my eyes. And I really enjoyed studying engineering, but I didn't enjoy being, a piece of a small piece of a large machine. And that's where I sort of said to myself, well, how does someone pay me to go surfing and travel the world and do all these cool things? And I stumbled upon the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that was in 2009. And that was when I was still in Australia. So I actually got the real estate bug through that book, but also having the self-awareness to be like, hey, I'm in the field of engineering. I already build things. I could have gone off and built businesses. I could have invested in stock market, but I chose real estate. And my dad, he was just a high school teacher and had done kind of okay for a middle-class guy through real estate. And it was just like, I've got a skill set that I know how to build stuff. So why not, let's get into real estate. And through that, I started attending local events in Australia, but then really had a real big passion to go and live in New York City just for a period of time. I'd backpacked through New York City back in the day, and I just wanted to, experience it as a real person. And the little known fact is I'm also chasing a girl. So I now married that girl, and we just had our first little baby. So that
congratulations!
Was all the way back in 2011. Yeah. So it's been a hell of a ride, and I will say, Tim, had no intention of moving to the US and starting and multifamily and syndication and all that good stuff. So hopefully my story comes across not as boasting, but more as just like trying to, anything's possible. As what does Tony Robbins say, you overestimate what we can achieve in a year, but you underestimate what we can achieve in a decade. And I think my story is a little bit to that. And as I said, I was going to come here for a couple of years and then move back to Australia and keep being an engineer. That was sort of it. So hopefully that inspires a few people to get off the fence and take some action.
That's awesome. Yeah. So did you start investing in New York or?
Well, yeah, 2 weeks fresh off the boat at my first New York Real Estate Investor Association, the REIAs, right? Great, fantastic organization that doesn't exist on the scale it does here in the US in other countries. So like
Mm.
the little group that I went to back in Australia just was coincidentally the only group, and it happened to be my home city. I know and this was 2009, 2010, 2011. So it was, very much in its infancy back then. But, coming to the US and just seeing this, real big tapestry network of RIAs that, could get on bus tours and go to Baltimore and go to, Maryland, or go down to, Pittsburgh, some sort of more secondary markets that you could start investing in. And it was all like for $30 at the door. So yeah, went to my first New York real estate networking event, and through that found like Syracuse was a market that I could afford. I could get the Greyhound bus from Penn Station up there on a Saturday, 4 hours up. I'd see the broker. He would drive me around in his car. Would see a couple of duplexes and triplexes, and then I'd get back on the bus and be back for a beer in New York City by Saturday night. So it started really just with curiosity of trying to use the money that I'd saved in Australia. But the big thing, Tim, was understanding that I could spend $30,000 and buy a triplex. Like coming from Australia, that doesn't exist. I'm like, $30,000? What the hell? So, I will admit it was an eye-opening experience in Section 8 housing, but I got started, right? And that's the whole point. It wasn't necessarily about smacking the first deal out of the park. It was about getting off home base, along the journey. So yeah.
I see. That's and then how did you go about, from going from this duplex to syndications?
Look, it was through, probably the biggest thing I'll say when I first moved to the US is that there was a lot of pitching about getting mentors and doing all this stuff and going to good boot camps and, all that good stuff. And I thought to myself, like, hey, I've got 2 brain cells. Like I can try and figure this out myself. And so I got to a point, I'd done a couple of deals. I was fixing and flipping a deal in Philadelphia, still living in New York City, about 12 months since moving to the US. So I'd already acquired 2 or 3 properties, all, through my own cash or some sort of creative financing with local lenders. And I knew probably, Tim, in the back of my mind, I needed to get that mentor, but it was through a very not a strategic, it was more kismet that I met up with a Canadian mate of mine who came through New York City. We'd studied engineering in Australia, and he was telling me, he's like, hey man, I was boasting. I was like, oh, I've got 7 units and I'm crushing it, still at a $60,000 a year job in, New York City, and can't can't afford my rent. But I thought I was killing it. And he went on to tell me about how he had done a 70 unit deal, and Scott was a good mate of mine. And I said, 70, like 70. And he's like, yeah, 70. And I was like, how the hell did you do that? And he went on to talk about other people's money, about a mentor, about getting seller carryback financing, all these things that I'd heard of in these RIA events that you go to on a monthly basis, but now seeing it play out in real life, and having probably the mental, awareness that here's a mate of mine now setting the bar at a certain level. If Scott could do it, why couldn't I do it? And it just came together. And then that was when I went out and got myself a mentor. And that was early 2014. I relocated to Los Angeles, where I currently live right now. My wife is originally from LA. And that's where I got a mentor. I found the cheapest mentor I could, who'd done 1 deal. He's now a very famous mentor that I'm sure a lot of people you've heard about. But it was, again, that mentor wasn't necessarily me. I was afraid to give out money, but it was actually me taking a bet on myself, right? If you look back on that, it was me parting ways. I think it was $2,500 back in the day. And that was the start of taking myself seriously. I still had to keep the day job because I still had a green card issue. And so at that time, I made a strategic decision to say, hey, I'm an engineer. I've got a skill set here that I could be valuable to a developer. And I just applied to a bunch of development firms, and coincidentally, someone gave me a job. And I thought, how could I get the maximum income with my W-2 job in the corporate America while still learning the business, right? And that was a very key decision in 2014. And so I went on to join a big real estate development company here in LA. I went and built on 400 or 500 high-end luxury town, multifamily apartment buildings in Long Beach in LA.
Oh, wow.
Whilst starting the podcast behind me, investing in the US, whilst trying to raise money for other people's deals, my mentor. And then in 2015, early 2016, I finally did my first lead syndication in San Antonio. And that was working full time. I actually did 4 lead syndications before I eventually married my wife and got the green card, and I could eventually quit the J job. So, and now we're here today, and I have been in a couple of different partnerships, as you mentioned, 3,500 units, $685 million and growing. We're now, historically, it's been all in Central Texas. San Antonio is where I cut my teeth, went up to Austin. That's the majority of where the last sort of 7 to 8 years have been, but now recently have gone to Arizona and into the South Carolinas. So it's been a hell of a ride, man. And as I mentioned earlier, the last 10 years, I had no idea I'd be sitting here talking about all this sort of stuff to your incredible audience, but it's a real lesson in like letting go of your those 10-year goals and sort of maybe just rolling with the punches a little bit more and then looking back and going, wow, that's pretty freaking cool. So I know the next 10 years are going to be just as incredible as the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been very impressive, your growth. Share with us your business model. What does it look like?
Business model, simple. Most guys on this show or on this mastermind, value add, right? I will say multifamily, just given my international flair, and there was another gentleman on the show on the call here who's from England. If you don't know, guys, all you Americans out there, multifamily does not exist on the scale it does here in the US, right? You cannot go in Australia and buy 250 garden style apartment units. It just does not exist. You can't go to Canada and do that. You can't go to Europe and do that. It is a very unique asset class specific to the US. So consider yourself, guys, lucky that you have this in the backyard. And that to me was what drew me to that. I'm like, wow, you can buy 200 units and the bank's going to lend on this future value. Like, that's awesome, and you got all this non-recourse agency debt, and the cap rates are really quite compelling, so it was just natural value add multifamily. Come in, put lipstick on a pig, nothing crazy. I did done a few things in that time that I bulk supply all my stuff from Asia. That's just lessons I've learned from big developers that I used to work for back in the day. Nothing, buy stuff in bulk, you get it cheaper. It's not rocket science. And, there's a few, I truly do believe in affordability. I think there's a massive issue across the globe, not only here in the States, but, look back at my home country of Australia, where multifamily could do really well, but because of land prices and labor costs and the lack of sophistication in lending practices, it just doesn't get off the ground. So, really think that there's going to continue to be a nation of renters. And I think coming out of COVID has really proven that multi's the sort of the bell of the ball. Self-storage is doing well, and there's industrial is doing really, really well as well. But I think, the human needs of food and shelter, is why compelling will always be, something that we can invest in, and something that you can invest across the globe, right? Housing is something that is not just unique to the US, but multifamily is on the scale that it is here. So it's been a really, really interesting evolution of my learning in and around that space.
Right. And do you source most of your deals yourself, or do you also co-GP, with other operators on their deals as well?
No. So historically I did with my mentor back in 2014, 2015, raising capital, trying to raise, starting raising $250,000, $500,000. And then, became a lead syndicator since 2016. I don't raise on other people's deals, as most people who built, as you start to build a brand, it's like, it looks weird if you're raising for, I have raised money for other industries I'm not in. Like I raised money on a hemp farm. Just, back in 2019 was a little bit quiet, but by and large, I just raised for my own deals.
Gotcha. Okay. Love to hear about, your very first raise that you did as a lead sponsor. How big was that raise?
It was 6.7 or 6.8 million bucks for 192 units in San Antonio, Texas. It was called the Joseph at Human. It was originally called the Gables. If any of you hunt in San Antonio, you may know it. Newmark, Matt Michelson is the broker who sold it to us and who eventually just sold it last year. That was a scary deal, man. That was I remember still on that deal. Funny story. Me and my business partner at the time, he put up the money. I was doing all the construction management. We had a few co-GPs helping us out. We had, for the first time, and this was 2015, 2016, like crowdfunding was still very much in its infancy. And we had a group signed up to raise us 1.5 million bucks. And they completely, I don't know if I can swear on the show. Can I swear on the show or not?
You can.
They shut the bed, right? And they couldn't raise a dime. Now, luckily, we got agency debt on it. So we were already raising for the CapEx and sort of closing costs and fees. So we didn't need the 6.9 to close, but it was like we were doing this is 3 or 4 weeks before closing. And we're like, crap, they have not raised a dime. So we were like around $4.5 million. Out of nowhere, I get a call, still working at my full-time job. And I'm, in the bathroom, hello. And there's this guy, and he's somehow got the deck through a group out in New York, shot it at some young buck had shot it out to like a 6,000 list.
Oh, wow.
And he happened to pick it up, and he calls me out of the blue. He ends up investing with him and his brother $1.3 million.
Oh, wow.
Now, I'm not super religious or super, woo, but like someone was out there was looking over us because I was like, you can't write that. Like you can't, and we got the deal done. And to that day, that same brother and the two brothers, they sat silent for 5 years. And then one of them owned a huge, an aged care facility business in Florida, sold it, and then we bought $100 million with them just as the one single check writer.
Wow.
About 12 months ago. So really interesting story, but also you can't plan for that sort of stuff. So these are the things that, sometimes you got to get a bit of good luck along the way.
Right. Now, with you doing your podcast and your book on investing in the US, do you attract most of your money from Australia and overseas?
Historically, that was the brand, right? And we can talk about branding till the cows come home. It was more that as soon as I opened my mouth, I had a weird accent, right? The book and the podcast, I think there's one chapter in the book that actually talks about international investing, how to get set up here. But the rest of it's for like anyone. It's just documenting my journey. What's the investing lingo? What does a cap rate mean? What is cash on cash? What's the lending? All these sort of so it's really for anyone. But I sort of in the beginning was niching till it hurts to attract to talk to the international investor. But since then I've pivoted, and the majority of my investors are actually American. So
okay.
The thing is with international, the foreign exchange, it's very tough to play that game as well, right? Like people are saying, okay, I'm investing from Australia or Europe or, Canada, and they're trying to take money back every quarter. It's like, guys, don't do that. You're going to get eaten alive with the foreign exchange. Even if you make money here, you could drop, the Canadian dollar or the Australian dollar could drop, and there's too much uncertainty there. So majority of my money today is raised from American investors.
Yeah, gotcha. And we won't dive too deep into it, but can you give us just a real quick setup structure of how does someone from another country invest in deals in the US?
Very simple. You can. So the beauty of the American way is that you can a non-US resident can be 100% member of an LLC. Again, consult your tax person and legal advice. I always got to say that, but you just got to set up an entity here, right? And the majority of why I aid my my handful of international investors with doing that is because as a sponsor, I don't want to be responsible for the 30% withholding tax if they invest directly with me. So if they say, hey, Reed, I want to give you $100,000. I'm like, no. Go set up a US entity, and then I can treat you and I can issue you a K1 like any other US entity. And that's the benefit of the US, where in Australia, I actually just opened up an entity back there for some investing I started doing back there. And I had to get my sister to be sort of like the non-member manager of the entity because she was local, right? I'm an Australian citizen, but I'm a non-resident. So there's different nuances where the US is quite open to international business. So it's getting the setup of the entity. The bank account's the hardest one, right? So a lot of my investors who come from overseas will come on a holiday here and open up a bank account, or they get power of attorney to open up a bank account here. Fund the bank account, get the EIN numbers and INTIN numbers, and then you're off to the races. And you can invest with whoever you want. So
Gotcha. Good to know. So what's you've raised a lot of money, obviously. What has been your top 3 challenges that you've come across it throughout the years, and even how the changing in the marketplace right now has posed a challenge for you in raising capital?
So when I start, and let me be clear, Tim, every time I raise capital, it's always like, oh, we're going to be able to raise it. Like I'm only touching certain deals because I'm not touching a that $100 million deal that I mentioned, I didn't have to really raise that money. It was just a single check writer. But I'm not going out and syndicating a $70 million deal because I can't raise, on a $70 million deal, you're probably raising 25 mil or 27 mil in equity. I can't raise that, right? So I'm looking at sort of between a 25 and $35 million mark. It's stuff that I can back into, that I can raise. And I've got co-GPs that come on still to this day and help me raise. But in general, I remember back in the day when I raised that first co-GP that I raised for on someone else's deal, thinking that, I was going to go out to 50 people, and those 50 people on my list, I was $500,000, that'll be easy, and I heard crickets, right? I heard absolute crickets. And it was a real cold shower around my lack of education, the lack of telling and educating the small followers I had at that time about what I was doing. And so the biggest lesson is this consistency, right? Is being consistent with a platform. So I chose podcasting. You've chosen this mastermind. I think you may also have a podcast as well. But it's being consistent, right? And for those people who, you don't play cricket here in the US, but in Australia and in England and in the Commonwealth countries, we play cricket, and it's called time at the crease. And when a batsman is there, can be there for hours and hours and hours. And it's about knocking and getting single runs and single runs and single runs. And it's the consistency over time. And there's I've met a handful of people who are just absolute freaks at capital raising. Like they've come from Dell, or they've come from, senior position somewhere. They can just raise $2-3 million at the drop of a hat. I started when I was in, my late 20s. So I didn't have a ton of gray hair, so to speak, to go and raise that money. So for the majority of us people, us mere mortals, we've got to invest in lead generating magnets like podcasts and books and masterminds and being consistent about it, right? Keep those shots on goal I've been doing a podcast since 2014. I don't make a single dime from that podcast. The only thing I do it for is because I know, one, I just enjoy doing it, but two, it's going to help generate leads and help the brand keep moving forward. So it's really, really important that, and you can never, you mentioned earlier, like my targeting Facebook ads. I only just started that this year, right? I had for the last 7 or 8 years, it was never, I knew I wanted to do it, but I just didn't have the time or the ability or the energy or the resources to go and invest in that. But I knew I needed to sort of scratch that itch, and why not have Facebook marketing going? Like, don't be so proud that you can't go and learn a new trick to add to your tool belt. So consistency is key, choosing a platform, and then building a brand around that and a narrative. And then from there, adding other things like Facebook stuff and, speaking on stage and, sponsoring events. I know the best ever conference is going on right now, like going and doing booths and stuff like that is good, but it takes time to build up, the resources to be able to do that.
Gotcha. And what has been your favorite, or the channel that you have raised the most amount of money from?
I think it would have to be the podcast. Now, I don't have a metric on, X amount of investors have come to me because, because of the podcast. But I think because when you search it, you Google someone's name, it's got the book and you got the podcast, and they can hear my story and they can hear how I think. And, I'm very out there with, and I'm quote unquote out there. I'm not as out there as some people, right? I probably could do more, but that has been the best lead generation from the podcast. And then all the other, the podcast turned into a book and actually turned into 2 books. So repurposing content over multiple different channels, YouTube as well, audio books. That is all the same content, just broken up into different ways to skin the cat, so to speak.
I see. So your podcast, is it mostly you're the one that's giving out the content, or is it a mix of you interviewing other people?
No, it's always been, because when I started, I didn't have any experience, right? And so I was creating a platform in 2014 to just interview leaders and people I looked up to. And it has actually morphed into being nearly like a coach for me, because I get people on the show today who I'm like, I'm interested in a topic. I just want to ping them with questions, and learn a little bit more. So
that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you for being our mentor today.
No, my pleasure. But it's so to answer your question, no, it's not me talking. I did the beginning, try to do something like that, but it got too much. So right now it's just a weekly podcast, talking to hitters as we can get on the show, and just about their story, and they're building something from nothing.
I see. And then, I mean, I assume, at your level right now, you also get booked on lots of podcasts and lots of stages. Have you found those to be very fruitful as well?
Yeah, they are. And that all just, it's like everyone talks about the snowball effect. And, in your early days, like, oh, what's snowball effect? I seem to be pushing a lot of snowballs down the hill and they're not getting anywhere. So I know back, so it's, today it is momentum and, invitations invite, morph into other invitations, but it truly does come down to consistency. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know for some people, they do lots of calls. They book appointments with every investor they can book appointments with. And then some has a more automated funnel and system. What's your model around that?
Well, I will be the first one to say, as an engineer, I'm a details guy. Like I make my most money operating deals within an inch of their life, right? And that's what I pride myself on. I don't actually like, cold calling. So I've got other people, the whole, what you mentioned about the Facebook stuff. I actually brought on a partner who handles all that now. So I knew I didn't want to be. I knew I needed to do it, but I didn't necessarily want to go out and learn it again. So it's come a long time to get to that point. But right now it's about, doing things that I know were going to make us, the company, the most amount of money. And sometimes, outsourcing things that I know that I'm just not good at. Now, I still get on calls. Don't get me wrong. I'm on all calls all the bloody time, but I'm not the one, initiating those touches with the investor and putting out the email content and booking the scheduling the calls and all that sort of stuff. I now have a team that helps me to do that.
I see. And then does your team, I guess where I'm trying to get to is your investor relations team, is the goal to get as many people on the phone as possible, or is the goal to have the automated system nurture these leads and then have the qualified ones raise their hand and be on the
Probably the latter, right? You want, I don't want to be spending my time half an hour on a call with a non-accredited investor, which I know they're not going to be able to invest in my deal, right? So it's like getting to a point where not anyone's just like, hey, I want to reach out and I'm just starting, and like I love that, and I want to be able to give you my time, but sometimes I just don't have. I'm running a multifamily investment company. I just don't have the time or energy. So yeah.
Gotcha. And are most of your deals 506C?
Today they're 506C. Historically, they will not. There was 506B, and I think that's more of the evolution of, since the 2012, the Jobs Act, coming into play, all that sort of stuff. That and the way people have viewed, the Cardones of the world and the Tim Ferrisses and the Tony Robbins, and use platforms to raise money and create audiences. We're doing it at a very, very smaller scale compared to those guys. So yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then do you have a fund, or do you raise all on like individual deals, syndications?
All individuals. I know we've got very good friends of mine who have started funds, and they have been very successful. It will be in our cards in the future, but we want to get a few more runs on the board, get through this sort of rocky time that we're seeing right now in the market. And then, because people, most of my retail investors, they want to see ABC Smith Street, right? They want to see that they're investing in the physical asset. I think the majority of people on this call who raise from retail investors, I think if you quiz them, they would say, I don't want to invest in a blind fund, or I want to see where the money's going. So it depends, horses for courses, and we'll eventually build up to that stage.
I see. Can you give us sort of your typical, investor customer journey? So,
sure.
How do they come into your funnel? What's the first thing that, you offer them? And kind of give us a little insight into that.
And I will say, guys, I've had a lot of stuff out in the stratosphere that didn't talk to one another for many, many years, right? And again, it was, I built content, but I didn't have the back end systems to try and tie it all together. And, so I look back and think the money I probably did lose, but not be doing a better job in the beginning. Again, what's my strength? And I probably should have brought someone on sooner to tie it all together. But, the books and the podcasts and the Facebook marketing. So we have a Facebook marketing funnel that's between deals. So there's a small webinar, there's a bunch of follow-up emails, and in and around educating the person about what we do. Now that I have a track record, it's great to show that. So that helps get them to a call. And then we have the deal funnel where it's a specific deal we're raising on, for a short 4 to 6 week period. We'll blast out a bunch of emails for that specific deal. That will have a lot of content around drone footage, around me walking around the property, telling exactly what we're doing and how to get a sense and a feel for the investor, what it is that this is, the multifamily investing in apartment syndication. And then through that, they come into our funnel, they come in through a bunch of automated emails, and then they get on phone calls with us. And, that's what we want. That's what we want. We want to get them into a call with either myself or my head of investor relations. And that is then hopefully producing a one-on-one call that we can answer questions. So, yeah.
Very cool. I know you haven't been through the last market crash, but I'm sure at your level you study a lot around that.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see this market going, and where do you see the opportunities are?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think the big thing, it's so unprecedented. We've come out of COVID. COVID was a scary time operating through that. Now we're coming in super inflation, and now we're trying to come into sort of making sure that we're increasing interest rates to cut inflation. So it's been if you look over the last sort of since COVID and just before COVID, it's been a bit of a rough couple of years. And so look, I think in general you got it. This is a 2008 was a US problem that percolated around the world. Today we're all at the same problem. We all have the same issues across the globe. It's the same economies, keeping in lockstep with the US to try and keep their dollar relevant. But also try and quell inflation, right? So what does that mean? So I've seen some markets expand in cap rates and going in at least 150 basis points. Last year it would have been 4% cap rates. Now they're in the mid fives. I do think we're coming to the beginning of the end in terms of the Fed rate expanding. I think there might be 1 or 2 more left. As soon as they pause and we start to see the forest between the trees, you will see a lot more money coming back into the market. It's been a pretty quiet beginning of the year. I was at NMHC in Vegas early this year with a lot of big heavy hitters, and there's a lot of money on the sidelines, just sort of waiting to see what happens. But I actually think it's a really good opportunity to be buying now, given that there's less competition. You can find, given that some sellers are desperate to sell because of expanding the expiring cap rates or the debt's coming due. So you may be able to pick up some deals now. The problem that I'm seeing is around the equity. If you're raising retail equity, we're raising on a deal right now in Phoenix, and it's been a little challenging compared to, say, this time last year. So even though we're getting it at a fantastic basis, which is 25% less than what things were trading for last year. So it's still trying to, know that there's still good opportunities out there. It's about finding those good opportunities, given everyone is sort of a little bit skittish right now, which I just think for anyone on this call, keep, again, shots on goal. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep underwriting deals to your underwriting metrics, and eventually I think you'll get a deal done. So yeah.
I see. You mentioned about the rate cap, expiring and stuff. Any of your deals that you ever had to do a capital call on before?
Not yet. Not yet. No. We've got rate caps expiring on a couple of the deals. We look at those deals, because that's been the flavor of the month, right? Since sort of 2018, when the debt funds came back into the space. They've been, it just made, and Freddie and Fannie just weren't as competitive. But today we've seen a sort of a shift back to more the 2016-17 era, where you go get your agency out of the gate. There's been a more flight of capital to better quality assets, newer builds, calling your 90s and newer build. So we're constantly looking at every day at our, having conversations with our banks that we know we've got expiring cap rates coming up on. What does that mean for investors? I'm actually a passive investor in a number of other deals that have paused distributions. So, I think again, it goes back to we've seen five-fold increase in interest rates in 12 months. Like something's got to break, right? Like you can't just keep increasing and just thinking nothing's going to break. So you're already seeing that percolate through pause of distributions, through potential capital calls with some operators, seeing what cash on hand, again, even us, we're looking at our cash on hand to say like how much we've got going, how much of a pathway we've got over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. I think, there's a lot of sentiment in the market that if you can survive to 25, you're going to do just fine. So it's about riding out these rougher times. And, you could technically argue that we're already in a recession because we've had a couple of negative quarters of GDP growth. So I think what we just need inflation to get on bloody board and stop keep going up so we can start see a bit of a pause there. Because as soon as you see pause in that interest rates, those rate cap prices will fall dramatically. And if you don't listen, there's another podcast I would highly recommend called the Rate Guy podcast with JP Cochran from Pensford. Definitely check that out. It's a very wealth of knowledge in and around rate caps and how it ties into the market today. So his data was saying that if you look back at history, as soon as Fed's pauses interest rate rises, cost of rate caps have nearly halved. Within 2 or 3 months after that pause. So because that's obviously then saying that the market will then swing back the other way. And so that the cost of that rate cap, of the risk, I should say, of interest rates continuing to rise is now come off the table. So if you look at the data, actually January, we thought it were coming to the end of it, and it just ticked up with the latest jobs number, which is a little bit bogus in my mind. But yeah.
Gotcha. So besides, continuing to source deals and underwrite deals, are you doing anything special to, prepare for being able to take on a lot more deals that are, that might be coming available?
The only thing we're doing is trying to spend a little bit more money in the marketing side, getting our funnels working better to get more leads coming through the door, continue to educate folks. I've always been a slow and steady wins the race type of guy. Like we do 4 to 5 deals a year in a good year. We may do 2 deals this year, 3 deals. Like it just depends. So how the rest of this year plays out. So it's just around continuing to cultivate good good investor relations, and then starting to look for other buckets of capital. So retail bucket is the number one thing that we rely on. But looking for more private equity and family offices, as we've got that track record now, as we're starting to build a bit of more of a reputation, I think people like to come along, when companies are in their infancy and say, hey, we'll partner up with you and, we'll be the single check writer. So we're looking to do a couple of those deals this year as well for the right deal. So, yeah.
I see. So I want to drill down a little bit with your retail investors. Do you have an avatar of, who most of your retail investors are?
Yeah, we do. I would say it's the, older millennials in their mid to late 30s who've got a bit of disposable income. But I haven't taken stock of the average age of my investors in a little while, but right, in the beginning for those folks just getting started, I think you got to be, for me, I'm in my late 30s, so I can relate to folks who are starting to come into the time where they've got a little bit more money to invest. But probably my true avatar is probably in their early 40s, a couple of kids, husband, wife, probably in some sort of high paying job that they don't know what to do with their excess money. And they want to put it in real estate, but they just don't know how to go ahead and do that. So sort of being that guiding force to show them the way is kind of probably what our best avatar is.
Gotcha. Is that the same? Like, do you run your Facebook ads yourself, or do you have a marketing? You do, okay.
Well, I don't personally run them, but we've got a group that does it. Sort of, I guess they're third party, but we are directed by my business partner who directs them in terms of exactly what we're looking at.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I'd love to hear whatever you know about, like who. The marketing agency, who are you guys targeting with your Facebook ads?
Yeah, I think that if I'm trying to remember back, we had a couple of different funnels. So right now it's someone in their mid 40s who has like a job earning of over $250,000, obviously very easy, or net worth, in and around looking for understanding, probably a little bit more wise, and they may have some stock investments, but they're looking to get into alternative assets. We do probably stock investments, mid-40s, good paying job. And what was the other one that I was trying to think of that I forgot? The mid-40s, good paying job, because obviously accredited investor. Well, yeah, that was kids. How many kids what age are their kids at? So you typically folks that I'll be seeing that are in there, got kids in there already at school, have a little bit more time to think about what they're going to do for their kids, right? So they're planning, their future planning for those kids in when they get 16, 17, 18 and 10, 15 years time. So that's been a really interesting avatar, because a lot of folks want to set that up the right way now with their excess cash.
That's awesome. I love that. What are some of your favorite tools that you use in the business?
Well, Zoom has been the number one right now. I think is pretty important. The other tools that we use, obviously, we're all on Google Docs. It's just been such an easy way to run the business. Slack is another big one. We use a lot because our team is remote. What is another one? I'm always in Yardi for our property management stuff. That's a big software that we use with our third-party property managers. But the biggest tool is creating culture in the business to attract good talent, right? Like that's what we want to. We want to constantly be attracting good talent, and we have a small base of good employees now. We want to continue to grow that and continue to have people that want to work for RSN and give their all. And hiring the right types of people. So it comes with me as being the head, cultivating a good culture, cultivating a good environment where people want to learn and be valued, and they want to get up to, they want to continue to grow their career.
Right. How big's your team?
7 people right now. So not huge, but not nothing. Right. We have a payroll. So we don't have third-party property management. We don't have property management in-house. We may do that in the future, but for right now, it's just focusing on what we're good at, and that's asset management, construction management, buying deals, raising capital. They're the sort of lanes we want to be in.
Gotcha. So like with the 7 people, what are their titles or roles?
Business partners, there's business partner. There is a head of acquisitions. There's sort of a head of acquisitions in the Phoenix market / I call him Josh Oaten. He's a Swiss Army knife of Phoenix. He's everything from asset management to construction management to acquisitions. We have a head of investor relations. We have 2 full-time analysts, and we also have a fractional CFO. To do all of our back end. The next hire will probably be, which we're going to make this year, is going to be in and around the capital raising business, sort of capital raising. So probably head of sales, and then shortly thereafter, we'll probably, as we start bringing on more and more assets, probably another asset manager.
I see. Good. Very, very good. Good to know that. And what investor portal software do you use?
We currently use Cashflow Portal. Goes well. Perry Zhang over there, he was on my podcast and was interested. He was starting out, I think, last year or the year before that, and we decided to jump in early. So it's a good one. But there's a lot of good ones out there. If anyone's wants a business idea, you need a tool, because all my investors are across so many different deals. How do you get a tool that gets all their logins? Because they're Juniper Square and Cashflow Portal and Syndication Pro. It's like, so if everyone's in the tech world out there, you maybe go start that, and it might be a pretty good little business, I think.
Awesome. So for the folks listening, you've raised over $50 million. That's a lot of money to a lot of people. For the ones that are, especially the ones that are starting out new, and they don't think that's possible for them. What would you say to them? What would you share with them?
It's cliche a little bit, but you've got to learn to bet on yourself. I think we get so caught up with understanding risk. What happens if I take this step, or what happens if I do this and it fails? I think at the end of the day, if you've got to be comfortable with assessing that risk. So I remember when I got started in this business, or even just coming to the US, for example, that was sort of I was leaving my family behind. I had no idea if this would even work out. But the risk was, okay, well, if that didn't work out, I'll just move back to Australia. Like that's the worst case scenario. So starting to play that out in one's mind, what happens in 10 years time if things go well, right? Like in asking those questions, and then learning to bet on yourself, I think, is a big one, because if you learn to bet on yourself, if you can't bet on yourself, who can you bet on, right? And that's, no one's going to come in your door and hand you what you want in life for doing nothing, right? You have to do the hard work, and investing in yourself and taking a bet on yourself probably starts. That's the starting point. And it's a little bit of blind faith, but hey, you got to start somewhere. So
yeah, that's good. Anything you would do differently if you were to start over again?
I don't think I would. I think that not necessarily start over. I'd probably invest a little quicker in people. I think that would be but again, as a sole entrepreneur starting out, you don't have a lot of cash. You have business partners because of, you split up the responsibilities and no one gets paid until the deal closes. That's the beauty of partnerships, but probably would start hiring a little sooner. That'd probably be the only thing. Well, and it's not necessarily a mistake. It's just more, doing it a little bit sooner.
Right. Yeah, so we're going to be wrapping up this part of the show. For the folks that wants to reach out to you, connect with you, partner with you, learn from you, invest in your deals, what would you like to send them?
Look, if you want to go to either reedgoossens.com, that's reedgoossens.com, you can sort of see all the podcasts and educational stuff. If you want to head over to rsnpropertygroup.com, that's Reed, Sophie, Nell, rsnpropertygroup.com. You can check that out, or more on the investment side. So yeah.
Awesome. You've been very generous with all the information you share with us today. What's something that us as the audience can give back to you? What are you looking for?
Look, I'm always looking for co-GPs. If people are out there, fund of funds, equity is always needed as we grow the platform. So if you're someone getting started and want to come in as a fund of funds or be a true co-GP, we can have that conversation offline.
Yeah, Reed, thank you so much for doing this interview with me today. I really appreciate you. Yeah, thank you.